Gregory, thank you so much for being today with us on Wake the F Up. Thank you
Good name, by
for
the way.
this invitation, and welcome to the show. So, Gregory, I'm not going to introduce you because it's better for you to introduce yourself. Like in a minute, if you have to summarize this entire life, how old are you, by the way? What's
I am 35.
35? So 35 years on this planet. What can you tell us about who you are right now, right?
I spent a very long time, basically all of my 20s, running around the world. I've been to about 50 countries so far. I just wanted to see how the world worked with my own eyes, form my own conclusions. I didn't want to take other people's word for it. And when you've been around the world enough, you do realize that most people's conception of other countries, other parts of the world, just comes from stories they hear from the media,
Yeah.
generalized conceptions and stereotypes, which may be a little bit accurate, but really don't capture the experience of being there. So it's one way to really develop empathy for humanity and really a grounded conception of how the human
Yeah.
race works, how the world works. Wake up from the narrative, the illusion that people tell you about how the world works. And it also helps you figure out what kind of person you are beyond just what you learned about yourself while you were growing up in one place. I'm
True.
from Southern California. Most people who grow up in California are very comfortable there, and they never leave California because of that. And the same thing is true with most places around the world. Most people don't leave, they don't travel very far outside the place they're born, or if they do, it's for a 2-week vacation or something, or a summer they spend in Europe maybe. But then they tend to go back to somewhere near where they grew up. And I currently live now in Armenia, which is literally 12 hours time zone away from California. I'm literally halfway around the world from where I started. And I've been a lot of places in between here and there.
So, in summary, you are a world traveler, right? Also a matrix explorer, I like to call it like that.
Yeah.
Which well, sort of connects to my story as well, being born in Morocco and also with very sort of a lot of conditioning here. And then when you travel, you're like, oh, there's something different. So, do you think that there is not one single reality? How do you define a reality, Gregory? This is a
Okay.
question I like to ask guests most often.
Reality in the objective sense is that which remains true even when you don't think about it or care about it, right? There is a reality that exists, that pre-exists your conceptions of it. And then there are 7 billion subjective realities, one held by each of the 7 billion
Individual.
people on this planet, right?
Right.
And as far as I can tell, the point is to align your subjective reality as closely as possible with the objective reality, knowing that you can never be there completely.
Mhm.
Science is our best attempt to determine what the heck is going on in the
Even
objective
science, yeah.
reality we all share, right?
That, well, that's, I mean, yeah, that's a very deep topic. I would say, as I've been also like investigating myself in the last years. But I think you can't have, from my perspective anyway, you can't have like 100% objective reality without our consciousness getting into the way.
Of course.
You can't
Yeah,
have an
we're
object
always
without a
filtering and
subject, right?
interpreting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but it's a very very interesting topic that we can come back to later. But I want to understand the Gregory, because back to your path before we go into your. I know you're an author. You wrote a lot of books as well. You did a lot of talks, and you also into educating people about this kind of expanding your consciousness sort of topics, right?
Yes, that is
But I
my
want to come back to
favorite
your.
thing to talk about, in fact.
Yeah, I can see that. But I want to understand the background of it. So, what got you in the first place to sort of? I'm not doing some psychological analysis. He's just trying to
Go
understand your
ahead.
journey as well.
If you think you can handle it, you're welcome to probe.
What got you into this breaking out of the matrix? Why did you just say, I'm tired of this. I don't want to follow the same path as anyone else?
I don't think even as a child I ever had an idea that I wanted to follow the conventional path. I always knew, I think around 10 years old, I gained this sense that I was smarter than most of the adults around me, which I know sounds very arrogant, but frankly, it was true. And from that naturally followed, well, why should I believe any of the things they tell me? Why should I accept any of the rules they make for me? Why should I accept the limits that they've set for what life
Yeah.
is supposed to be? Why should I accept anything at face value? That, so as soon as I turned 18, I became obsessed with traveling just because that was the easiest way for me to escape the worldview they'd given me, see what else
Like,
is out there, test
mm,
the limits, right?
yeah. I understand. Okay, there was not one single event. It was mostly the environment that got you. You didn't feel at ease in the
Right.
proposal that they gave you, right?
I think with
Of
a
free
lot of
will.
people, there has to be some critical mass where they realize, oh, I'm not living the life I want to live. Oh,
Yeah,
reality is fundamentally different than I accepted it was. And sometimes this happens when you're very old, and we call this a midlife crisis, right?
yeah,
But also, I think it is possible just to never get to that point where you've even really accepted the program, where just from the very beginning of your conscious self-awareness realize something is wrong here. I do not like the way
yeah,
this game is operating, and I refuse to participate in it.
yeah. I mean, it's not easy for everyone to have this sort of innate awareness, I think. Um, but have you ever like experimented with, let's say, psychedelics, mushrooms, this kind of
Yeah.
substances that's also
Well, I'm
sort of
I'm from Southern
shift your
California,
consciousness?
which is probably the easiest place in the world to get those
Yeah, it
kinds
is.
of things.
I don't know. Is
It is
it?
without
Okay.
even trying. Everybody knows somebody who has
All right.
connections to those kinds of things
So,
there.
does it help this kind of does it help to break out of the matrix, to have this sort of, to try experiment with substances,
I
or
think
do you
that
think it's
heavily
easier to just,
depends on the person and the settings under which
yeah,
you do it and your expectations. I think it's a tool like anything else. It just depends how you're using it, because plenty of
how you use it?
people drop acid regularly just as recreation, just to see funny colors and melting
Yeah,
walls,
true.
right? And
Exactly.
people can have major personal breakthroughs because of how they're thinking about things differently. I'm I really liked those kinds of things, like anything that just enhances my thinking and makes me reframe the way I think about common things, see them from another perspective. I've always been a big fan of those things. I remain very lucid on psychedelics. Like I don't
Mhm.
ever really
Yeah, same.
become like just totally lost and I'm hallucinating. I
Crazy.
don't know what's
Yeah,
going on, but
yeah.
just very like, oh, isn't this interesting the way it's making me think about things differently, right? I spent a lot
Yeah,
of time in South America too, where you can get things like ayahuasca quite
yeah.
easily, which many people consider one of the most spiritual drug experiences you can have.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't say like drugs are the path to enlightenment or something, but I would say absolutely they can be a very useful tool if you're oriented in a certain way and you approach them with a certain type of intention.
Yeah, I think exactly the same way. I think it all depends on your intention, right? I know a lot of young people. I mean, teaching students as well in colleges and like in business schools, particularly, and they're all having, like, they all know about mushrooms, but nobody's like necessarily highly conscious of the reality and just challenging it, and
Yeah,
so
that's true of anything, because
it
there are
all
plenty of
depends on the
people
context.
who travel to many places now, but didn't have like major interpersonal breakthroughs about themselves and the state of the world because of it. It's just recreation for them. Digital
Mm,
nomads are very common now. I've known tons of these people who just work from a laptop and go hang out on a beach in Thailand or the Philippines or
okay.
something. And they're just their goal is to just have a good time. And that's
Okay.
fine. If that's what they want to do, go for it. But some people use travel as a fundamentally different kind of journey or tool.
Mm. Uh, so, talking about travels before I move to your book, what are the place or the two places that just stuck in your mind because there was something fundamentally challenging to your own self, to your own reality, that made you
Yeah, well,
change in a sense, right?
that is a major thing I talk about, which is I've had amazing experiences traveling, and I've had a heartbreaking, soul crushing, dark night of the soul types of experiences, because while you get to see like the diversity and beauty and everything incredible about the world when you travel, you also see the ugliness and just the most insane, inhumane things that you never would have imagined being true
Yeah.
about the world. For me, the most difficult place to live definitely was China. I spent 6 months in China. It was the
Oh,
worst six
okay.
months of my life because I experienced a state of society that was fundamentally counter to all my fundamental ideals of like freedom of expression and promoting the
Yeah,
power of the individual in a highly collectivist, highly brainwashed society.
interesting. And so, what are the learnings from it? Do you believe in the idea of good and bad, or for you it's more
Well,
like
I would
a
say good and bad
subject?
are subjective evaluations, but you could say good and evil might be something like an objective evaluation,
Mm.
like that which supports the functioning of human consciousness and that which suppresses it. Perhaps those would be good
Okay,
general
so depending on,
definitions
yeah,
to
super.
use. So if you have a totalitarian society where no one can effectively think for themselves or make their own choices, I would say that is highly suppressive of human consciousness,
Mm.
therefore evil.
Yeah, I see. So freedom is an important on this path, I think, of self-awareness, right? If you don't have the freedom to experiment, to do things, then you should
How can
travel
you question anything? How can you explore
independently,
and
right?
experiment and make unconventional choices if you don't have
Not even
freedom?
read books. I remember back at the
Right.
time, even in Morocco, like I think back in mostly authoritarian regimes, even the books were sort of forbidden to read books.
Yeah, and
So,
they call it the Great Firewall of China, where they censor half the internet and allow only very few movies
yeah,
and books to be produced there, and because it's thought control, thought crime. They know that that's how you control people by only allowing them to
I
think
control people.
certain
Yeah.
things.
Exactly. Which makes a good transition to talking about heroes. Because
Hmm.
ultimately, a hero is someone that breaks out of this sort of chains, right? What you have a very interesting definition of hero I found in the book, but
Yes,
we can all connect to a superhero from the movies, right? From Disney movies, for example. These people that have extreme superpowers and are totally different from other human beings that are sort of
right,
godlike status. But that's not necessarily exactly your definition in the book, which is more personal. Also,
right,
I feel like
right.
it's very personal.
So
What
the
is a
concept of the
hero?
superhero is not an exclusively modern one, although in modern times it's become much more popularized through comic books and the Marvel movies and so forth.
Mm,
But the idea has always been, someone who usually endowed with some kind of exceptional power. Doesn't have to be flight and invincibility and laser vision or anything. It could just be someone who's exceptionally skilled in some domain, right?
yeah.
Exceptional abilities, right? Even exceptional intelligence could be considered a superpower, right? Or even just a unique perspective on things, um, who is dedicated to pursuing their values at all costs and will face incredible hardship in the path to enacting those values, usually because of social and cultural resistance from people who
Mhm.
who are trying to control and contain and fight against those values, right? That's usually what the superhero does. Even in the modern comic book variation, it's Superman upholds truth and goodness and justice because that's what defines him. That's what he fundamentally believes in. Not because
Yeah.
I'm going to go punch the bad guy or save a cat from a tree, but I'm going to embody my values in every way I possibly can because I can do those things better than anyone else because I'm Superman. And that applies to all of us as individuals too, once we become self aware enough to know what it is that fundamentally defines us and what we are most identified with. And that's why something
Do
like
you,
China was so negative for me because it was like literally confronting the exact opposite of everything I knew about myself and believed in. It was like going to hell.
yeah. Do you so my question here is more about these values that you're talking about. Do you truly believe that we have an authentic sort of self with certain values that are inherently ours, or we can develop our values? Or I mean, is it something fixed that we need to search for, or do you think that's it can change depending on the context, depending on, do you think that Chinese people, for example, believe their value is be part of the community and collective, be collective in a
I
sense?
believe they've been conditioned to believe that, yes.
Okay.
But
Do you think that
to
freedom is our value by nature?
to say
But
that
I
there
mean, deep
is
down.
no fundamental self that pre-exists social conditioning is essentially to say you don't exist, right? And any concept of a self you have is
Mhm.
totally illusory, right? That you are just the product of other people and other influences telling you what to be. But if you have true self-awareness and you can truly self-reflect on your thoughts and your
Mhm.
emotional responses to things and why you act the way you do, I would say that's the beginning of having a true self. That's what consciousness and self-awareness is, the ability to self-reflect on your own thought processes, your own
Yeah.
experience of life, right? Which can make you say, wait a minute, I'm not those things I've been conditioned into being. There's more to me than that. I can choose something else, something that is fundamentally important to me. And I don't know why you would go through such a difficult, lengthy, lifelong process unless it was that important to you. I don't know why you would face death even in some cases, like how
Yeah.
hard it is for the average Chinese person to escape their imprisonment, either just psychologically or physically leaving China. You'd only do that if there was something fundamentally driving you that you felt was more important than everything you were working against. That's who you really are, I think.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, the basics of it, I agree. I'm just trying to challenge it. I'm just thinking at the same time because there is this two theories, right? There's this theory that's determinism, that we are determined by certain factors and environment and so on, and the theory that we can sort of we are free beings, right? The freedom, we are free beings to
Mhm.
choose our path, right? So, and if you go to, for example, Eastern philosophies, there's this idea of cause and effect, which I read a lot about. Even when we choose, aren't we conditioned by subconscious factors that tell us, for example, you are born in the US, so for you,
Mhm.
maybe, aren't you typically maybe subconsciously moving, leaning toward more like freedom and democracy
Yes,
and,
of
you know?
course. But I can acknowledge that too. I can say in many ways I was very fortunate to be born in California in the good old
Mhm.
US of A because it gave me certain advantages. It gave me certain freedom of thought and inquiry that I wouldn't have had in most other places.
Yeah.
As many problems as there may be in the US, in many ways, it was a very big advantage for me to be born there. But that doesn't mean that I am defined as an American, as a product of the culture I grew up in. It just
Yeah.
gave me certain opportunities and advantages, right? There is still a me that continues to grow and expand and learn about myself that extends well beyond the boundaries of what I was exposed to growing up in California.
So even if you're born in a free country, you need to challenge the status quo. Doesn't mean, I mean, because I know people that are
Yes.
born in Europe, and for typically, I'm living in Europe now. They show a certain. I feel like they have a lot of freedom. Obviously, I mean, compared to other countries that I travel to. But at the same time, there is no willingness to sort of challenge this freedom, this life,
Mm,
and move beyond. Why do you think so? Even we give freedom to people, like, okay, you are free, but people don't take it as an opportunity, like you did,
mm.
to grow and expand.
Well, think of it
What
this
are the
way.
obstacles there?
If like I agree still with many, not all, certainly not all, but many of the values that I grew up with in America, like free enterprise, for instance, entrepreneurship,
Mhm.
things that are
Yeah.
heavily promoted in American culture. I agree with those things now, not because I was initially conditioned with them, but because I have taken the time to deeply question them and assess them if they actually make sense. I would just phrase it as I got a head start by being conditioned to them early on. But those things, if they're true, if they're authentic, and if they're objectively valid, they should remain there even after that intensive questioning process, right? You should accept
Mhm.
nothing
Yeah.
at face value, not just, well, I
Okay.
grew up thinking this way, so it's my value now, it's my culture. No, you should keep it if it's worth keeping. And you only know if it's worth keeping by intensely questioning
Challenging it.
and assessing it, attacking it from every possible angle and
Yeah.
seeing what survives.
Yeah. I see. Okay. And why do you think people don't do that? Why don't they go through this process of challenging
There are
and
many
asking
possible
questions,
answers to that.
asking deep questions? Does it scare them? Is it scary?
Yeah, one is, yeah, most people don't have a fundamental sense of self-security, and asking these kinds of questions will make you
Mm.
feel insecure. So you need to be very, very resilient to go on this kind of journey. It takes a good deal of intelligence, I would say, and a lot of people are not very intelligent. I know that sounds very judgmental, but it's true. You need
What does it mean, intelligence?
intel
By the IQ sort of standards, or what's
Well,
your?
I don't know if IQ is a perfect way to measure intelligence, but I would define intelligence as the ability to categorize information, to think
Okay.
critically and analytically about your beliefs. You have to be able to rearrange the information in your head and look at it from different perspectives and under different presuppositions. That requires a good deal of intelligence. Like there's no
Okay.
getting around that. Um, and certainly for me, that was the fundamental part of my transformative self-discovery journey is being willing to question as critically as possible everything I thought was true about myself and the world. And for other people, I think it really just comes down to they aren't unhappy enough. They have too much social acceptance. They're born into relative comfort. They have good relationships with their family and their friends and their society, and they earn a nice, place to operate from their society within. They have no reason to question anything. They're happy with the role they've been given. I think you have to be unhappy enough to say, well, this isn't right. There's got to be more than this, and I have to be determined to go figure out what it is. But you're going to be very unlikely to do that if from the moment you're born, you're celebrated for embodying the role that people give you.
So you were unhappy at the time when you took this path to
I
travel
told
and
you, yeah,
go
I
away?
think I was unhappy from the time I was a 10-year-old kid. I don't know
Okay.
why. And I think for most people, it probably happens later when they realize, oh, I'm going to
Yeah,
college
the
just because
midlife
people told me
crisis.
to
Yeah.
go to college. I'm working the job that people told me to work. I'm not really making any choices here. And none of this has anything to do with what I actually find meaningful and rewarding. So what would those things be, right?
Yeah.
Maybe early
Yes.
20s is more common for most people.
True. It's like the dog who's sitting on a nail and barking, and the guy is asking
Mm,
like his owner why is he complaining, and he's like the other one's like he's just sitting on a nail, and he's like yeah, but why doesn't he move? Because well, because he doesn't hurt enough, right? So it's
yes, I love
that's
that
the story.
parallel. Yeah. When are you going to stop complaining? I'm not happy, and actually start doing something about the fact that
and,
you're not happy.
and that's interesting because mostly I worked for many clients in France particularly. I don't know in other countries, but I think it's more or less the same. I think maybe it's different in the US. I don't know. But anyway, people are not necessarily maybe they're complaining a lot, right? Every day they're complaining about something. They're not happy about this, about that, and they just go on through their life as a normal life, and that's the way it should be, without necessarily challenging it. But you talked about intelligence and about comfort. Maybe too much. I mean, you don't necessarily feel the deep pain to move on, to move, look for something else. But also, I feel like there's also this idea of somehow lack of awareness, not lack of awareness. I mean, like awareness, the environment sort of makes stimulates people to follow certain things. Like, oh, there's a party here, there is another job
Mhm.
here, there's money to get there, and there is your friend calling, and it's like a lot of stimulus around you that you're not necessarily in the mood to just explore more
A
things. You
lot
don't
of
have
distraction,
that's
certainly. So one thing that I didn't really mention that certainly had a strong influence on me and probably affects people even in ways they aren't consciously aware of is the influence of what I would call mythologically significant art, which could be any kind
mythologically
of like
significant.
movie or book or painting or song that reminds you of something that is fundamentally true about yourself. Um, it could
Mhm.
be as something as obvious and direct as the hero's journey, which we often hear about from Joseph Campbell. Star Wars
Yeah.
is the quintessential example of that in our modern times. The journey of Luke Skywalker leaving home to fight Darth Vader and save the galaxy and discover who he is, right? But it could be any kind of story or anything that just makes us feel something so deeply that it begins to remind us of something fundamental about who we are. People don't usually frame it that way. They just say, "Oh, I just resonated so much with this story. I was so deeply moved by the way this
Yeah.
character acted and the choices they made. Harry Potter and the way he whatever." So even from things that might seem superficial on the surface, if they have the capacity to remind us of deep, important truths by activating our deepest emotions, can absolutely play a role in helping us figure out who we are.
Yeah, interesting. Never thought of it necessarily this way, but yeah, I mean, you always, mostly as a kid. I think when we are kids, we are most. I think we have this sort of. I don't know if you agree with me, but as kids, I have my nephews right now with me in Morocco, and they're just interesting to. There is some deep, although it's basic consciousness, but there is some deep connection matching
Mhm.
with what's right and what's not right. This idea of Superman is and Spider-Man is the best, and this is
Yeah.
the villain, and I shouldn't be like this.
There are
Maybe a bit of ambition of it.
reasons certain
Mhm.
stories and certain characters perpetuate in culture for decades or even
Mhm.
centuries. Superman is like 80 years old now, and yet the character gets updated over the generations. But there was something timeless about what that character represented when he was first conceived that he continues to represent in the
Yeah,
modern world and probably will for a
okay.
very long time.
Sort of archetype, if
Yeah.
I take Carl Jung's terms. Okay, so back to the book. 36 themes in your book, right?
Yes, this is the book, by the way. It's
The hero,
appropriately called The Heroic and
the hero.
Exceptional Minority. And
Yeah,
I do
exactly.
talk about things like mythologically significant movies that affected me when I was growing up, and I talk about all these things. Another book I wrote before, incidentally, since we're talking about travel so much, was called
Yeah, sure.
Travel as Transformation. How travel can be a transformational journey depending on how you do it.
I agree. And so can you tell us? I don't want to like choose a theme, but what's your best theme in the book, or what's the best sort of idea that you sort of connect more with when you mostly when you wrote it, not necessarily when you obviously. I don't know if you read your books many times after you write them, but
I read them a lot while I'm writing them, certainly. They get read about 100 times in
okay,
the process of editing. But honestly, once they're published, I mostly just try to move on to the next book.
yeah,
I figure, okay, that's
same,
done. It's
same.
out there. It's going to go live its own life now, and I'm focusing on
Next
something
idea.
else. I'm not like opening up old books every night and reminding myself of what I wrote. Um, but the title pretty much says it all. I chose that title very deliberately, the heroic and exceptional minority. I figured those were the two most important qualities that define the kind of person I'm talking about and who I wrote this book for. Heroism, we've already been talking about, more or less, which is some kind of dedication to a higher moral ideal that defines you. And
Mhm.
exceptionalism is recognizing that you are not the same as the general norm around you, and therefore the rules that apply to them and the game they're playing will not necessarily apply in your life.
Yes. Okay.
That's something we see in a lot of movies about certain superheroes, is first like recognizing the burden that, oh, I'm not like other people. Oh, I have superpowers. Oh, I have some kind of awareness and perspective that they don't have.
Yeah. Exactly.
Neo waking up from the Matrix is like first accepting that I don't live in the same world everyone else does. I can see the code of the Matrix that they can't see, right?
And you know what's
Uh,
you know what's funny when you watch Neo, like I watched it when I was, I think, very young,
mhm,
14 maybe. And when you watch it 20 years later, it's totally different sort of understanding, right?
mhm,
Because you sort of can connect more with it than before. Before it's just, I mean, you get this boost of adrenaline that, oh, there is Superman there that is challenging the status quo and the Matrix. But when you move on through this path of heroism, of looking for your own journey and building your own sort of authentic self, uh, you connect more with it because you're like, oh, well, maybe it doesn't have to be, as you said, superpowers like crazy vision, Blu-ray,
that's
whatever
just
it
a
is. And
dramatic display
that's
for
dramatic, right?
entertainment purposes. You don't have to be able to
So yeah,
fly, right? But it's the
so
principle
yeah, go
is
ahead.
about like realizing that you can set your own rules, or at least discover what the rules are for yourself. You don't have to just accept. Agent
Mm,
Smith says something like that to Neo before he's woken up from the Matrix. When they're interrogating him, he says something like, "You seem to think that the rules do not apply to you, Mister Anderson. That you can just make up your own rules." And that's the theme of the movie, essentially, like Neo being self-confident and empowered enough to say, no, fuck you, I make my own rules. I see through the code of the Matrix now, and I can do whatever I want. I can fly if I want.
interesting, interesting. And so, what is, or let's focus a bit on the people maybe viewing this. Why or how can they um, become heroes, right, in their own ways? How can they start this journey of heroism? I talked in my like the book I just recently released, Subtle Art of To Wake the F Up. I mean,
Mhm.
one of the strategies that may be applied, and you know, because as you said, every journey is different. Every journey depends on the person. But are there some big principles that you can share with us
Yes, I would say
to
no
move to
matter what
heroism?
form the journey takes, whether it's traveling around the world when you're 20, because that's what excites you and interests you, or
Mm,
anything you might do, it definitely begins with you trying to discover what is fundamentally true about you and what is consistently true. What would continue to be true about you under all possible conditions? What has the power to
mhm,
activate the strongest emotional responses in you, whether positive or negative? Like, why did I have such a negative hellscape kind of reaction to living in China when plenty of people visit China and don't have that kind of reaction?
Yeah.
Why do I feel a sense of purpose and meaning and reward from certain kinds of activities that other people don't feel that from? That's revealing something about me to myself, right? And you do that enough
Mhm.
times under enough different conditions, and you start to see that there's some consistency to the principle of who I am.
So it's like considering yourself as a machine, as an AI, and testing this AI in different sort of with different variables, different parameters,
Okay,
and
that's an
seeing
interesting way to think about
what
it.
is the
Very
response.
timely way to think about it.
Very nerdy way to put it, but
Yeah, we are in the age of AI, so whatever analogies help you understand the concept, sure.
yeah, maybe. So you agree that's more or less the strategy you're offering, no?
You have to find out what your own limits are to who you are, and therefore what rules apply to you, what game you're fundamentally playing. And it definitely isn't going to be just whatever conditions you happened to be born in and the version of you that your society encouraged you to become. There could be some truth to that. It's not necessarily a complete lie. You know, there may be some things you learn about yourself that have been consistent even with who the world told you to be, but it's not going to be the whole story, definitely. There's
Yeah.
a whole lot more to you that exists beyond what you happen to know about yourself so far.
Do you take into consideration the evolutionary sort of pressures um, as part of the matrix, as part of the conditioning, or not?
You mean cultural pressures or like actual
No, the
biological
the, the
pressures?
evolutionary. That obviously we're coming from animals, then from plants, the whole
Uh,
Darwinian evolution that makes
right,
us biological sort of machine because we're also conditioned we can't fly, right? That's because
right.
we don't have wings.
Okay.
And
So I think this
is this
goes back
also
to
part
your
of the
initial
breaking down?
question.
Yeah.
You initially asked, is there an objective reality, essentially, right?
Mhm.
And I have to say, yes, there are laws of physics. There are hard limitations that cannot be broken. We don't know exactly what those limits are, right? We're always discovering new emergent properties, ways we can use
Mhm.
technology and scientific principles to do things we couldn't do before, like send a man to Mars or something, right? Things that used to be impossible are now becoming realistic, right? But that will always be true. But there
Mhm.
has to be an objective reality that works according to certain principles. Our task is to figure out what those principles are, right? We
Well, it
cannot say
depends.
for sure that we
In
know
some
what they
theories,
are.
they say we have like multi worlds, right? Where you have different sort of
But
physics or
even if there were
of
some
physics.
kind of multiverse with many versions of you or something, that would we could still describe that as an objective reality with just many different facets. There would still
Okay.
be rules that govern how these various universes work, right? So I think no matter what path you take, you have to first accept that there is a reality that you're living in and you exist in this reality. And what are you going to do about that now? It can't just
Mhm.
be, well, it's whatever I want it to be. Right. And that may sound like it contradicts what I was just saying about like Neo making his own
Yeah.
rules. But really, what he's doing there is he's discovering for himself where the limits actually lie. He doesn't just accept, well, the machines and the simulation were programmed this way. So that's how it has to be. That's how everyone lives. He says, well, what if it's not that? What if there are
Yeah.
other limitations that are further away, wider, more open than what other people have accepted?
I see your point here. So it's unveiling the limits rather than accepting them.
Sure. Every
Okay.
unconventional lifestyle choice I have made throughout my life was always initially met with resistance, with normies, people who accepted the normal program of how life and in that part of the world was supposed to work, saying, "Well, you can't do that. You can't get on a plane to the Central American jungle right out of high school." Well, why can't I? Well, because that's not what people do. Okay, but is there any physics preventing me from doing that? If I have money for the plane ticket and, and I have a backpack full of
And there
stuff,
is a plane.
yeah, like why can't I go do that? Why have you accepted that that's a thing that cannot happen, right?
Yeah.
Or if I want to make money in an unconventional way, if I want to I now live in an Armenian village where nobody speaks English around me, and even the Armenians thought I was
Do you speak
crazy for
Armenian?
doing that, right? And I said, well, why can't I do that? This person's selling a house. I have money to pay for it. Why can't I go buy that house and live in it and start refurbishing it? What's the reason why I cannot do that thing? Is it just because it's not something most people do? That's how most people think. You have to do what most people do with very minor variation allowed from that deviation from that norm.
Interesting. I like the lifestyle. What's uh okay, one maybe one or two last question, Gregory. About consciousness. What do you think about consciousness? What's your perspective on, like, for example, when you dream, right? I just had a dream yesterday, a lucid dream, and I'm like just thinking about it, so it's better to just throw it on the table. uh, you get the dream and you just go through this all dimension and you experience things in different ways, right? It's
Hmm.
part of the experience. Is it for you reality or imagination? What's the limit here?
Okay, well, it's a perceived reality, right? Just like when you're on drugs and tripping balls, you're perceiving an enhanced version of reality where colors are different and the size of objects are different, and you're also thinking about things differently. Beyond your actual sensory experience, you're interpreting information
Yeah.
differently, right? I don't see how a dream is any different than that. It's like a heightened dramatic state of interpreting reality, except in that case, there's no actual sensory perception you're interpreting. It's all just information your brain is already playing with. It's like recreating a perception of reality
Yeah,
just within
but
your mind.
is it nonetheless reality? Is a reality an experience? I mean, is experience reality
It's
or?
definitely a subjective experience, which may or
Yeah.
may not have valid things to learn from it. Like, I wouldn't say that it's actually happening in the objective physical sense, but that doesn't mean that it can't be valuable and that you can't derive some kind of use and
Okay,
meaning from the subjective experience of it, just like with drugs.
makes sense.
When I
Okay.
watch a movie about Superman saving the world, I'm not actually watching Superman save the world. I'm watching a simulation of that, right? But I know it's a simulation and I
But
can
but
still
you
learn something from it and still have a meaningful emotional engagement with the
yeah.
simulation, right?
Okay. Okay, last question about your next maybe projects. How do you sort of get the creativity, the subjects, the intuition to write about new topics, and what are your next sort of projects maybe?
Yes. Well, I'm very unconventional in this way because I seem to always write about different things. I don't just pick one niche and stick to it. I'm working on my seventh book now. Every book I've written has been about something different. There are themes connecting them all, definitely, like the theme of enhancing
Mhm.
self-expression and self-actualization and all that. The latest book I'm working on is called Romantic Idealism, a masculine perspective on love, sex, and intimacy. I'm writing about it because I feel
Idealism.
very strongly about it and because I perceive there are a lot of problems in the world related to people's poor understanding of this subject. I think in particular it could help men understand themselves better and it can help women understand men. So I'm
Mhm.
writing about it because I want to write a book that could actually meaningfully influence the way people think about something important.
Okay, interesting. So you think we men don't understand how the love dynamics work in
I
general?
think men don't understand themselves, right? And by extension, they don't understand women because they don't understand why they're attracted to women the way they are, why they respond to women the way they do.
Yeah.
And it just creates a whole lot of chaos and strife in
Conflict.
romantic settings when people don't understand themselves or why they're attracted to each other. I would love to
Makes
write
sense.
about the feminine perspective too. I'm not qualified to write that book, though. I hope
Well,
some
you can
woman
always
will
do
write that book.
collaborations. No, you can always do
Yeah,
collaborations.
in the introduction of the book, I say that. I say, hey, I'll do the best I can to write about women here, but I can't write directly from the feminine experience because it's not my experience. So if there's some qualified woman out there who wants to write the feminine equivalent of this book, write to me and I'll help you write that book because it's much needed in the world. I would learn a lot from it.
Makes sense. The yin and yang. Okay, Gregory, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking part in this podcast. I enjoyed talking to you really about these really deep topics. That's why, well, we talk about deep topics, but at the end of the day, it's affecting us, right? So
Mhm.
with gaining more wisdom about any topic is ultimately needs to be reflected on your life in positive terms. Otherwise, it's not useful anyway. So,
Mhm.
um, so it's not deep per se. It's important topics. um,
Yeah.
so thank you so much, and hope all the best luck for your next book project. And any last words for the viewers, and then we close the this
Just
podcast.
if you like any of the things we've talked about, check out my books on Amazon, both the ones I mentioned, and also I write about some pretty interesting other things that you might find useful. Or if you want to get in touch with me, you can go to my website, gregorydiehl.net. Diehl is spelled Diehl.
I'll put all the info in the description, guys, so you can check it out.
Cool.
Okay, thank you, Gregory. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye bye.